the computer has fundamentally changed the way that we think about tools, because computation is dynamic. So it can do a million different things and run a million different applications. However, computers have the same static physical form for all of these different applications and the same static interface elements as well. And I believe that this is fundamentally a problem because it doesn't really allow us to interact with our hands and capture the rich dexterity that we have in our bodies. And my belief is that then we must need new types of interfaces that can capture this rich abilities that we have and that can physically adapt to us and allow us to interact in new ways. And so that's what I've been doing at the MIT Media Lab and now at Stanford. So with my colleagues, Daniel Leitinger and Hiroshi Ishii, we created Inform, where the interface can actually come off the screen and you can physically manipulate it. Or you can visualize 3D information physically and touch it and feel it to understand it in new ways. Or you can interact through gestures and direct deformations to sculpt digital clay. Or interface elements can arise out of the surface and change on demand. And the idea is that for each individual application, the physical form can be matched to the application. And I believe this represents a new way that we can interact with information by making it physical. So for the Milan Design Week, we created Transform, which is an interactive table scale version of these shape displays, which can move physical objects on the surface, for example, reminding you to take your keys. But it can also transform to fit different ways of interacting. So if you want to work, then it can change to sort of set up your work system. And so as you bring a device over, it creates all of the affordances that you need and brings other objects to help you accomplish those goals. So in conclusion, I really think that we need to think about a new, fundamentally different way of interacting with computers. We need computers that can physically adapt to us and adapt to the ways that we want to use them, and really harness the rich dexterity that we have of our hands and our ability to think spatially about information by making it physical. But looking forward, I think we need to go beyond this, beyond devices, to really think about new ways that we can bring people together and bring our information into the world, and think about smart environments that can adapt to us physically.
Hey, what's up guys? Gonz here for the Facelikethesun YouTube channel. So, ever since my conversation with Nicholson 1968, I gotta tell you, the black gold, black goo thing is just everywhere. I cannot stop seeing it all over the place. Some of it probably a stretch in my mind, other times I think it's legitimate in terms of its reality, either hidden from us or seeking towards it through the sciences and the technological advancements. It's a topic that really would spark a connection or a common ground in topics like shape-shifting, extraterrestrial or interdimensional, portals, gateways, but also areas of black-eyed children, people reporting seeing people's eyes turn black, shadow people, tulpas, where we think of something in our minds and we sort of manifest it somehow into a reality. Look at anything in the topic of the supernatural world or spiritual world and apply the black goo concept. And there's a connection point, because the black goo is really the substance that connects the physical and non-physical world. And it opens up a whole new level of understanding of how creation is made. Because if you think about it, programmable matter. We live in a matter construct. Everything that is around us is programmed matter, whether in some way by humans manipulating what's already there or things that we find naturally in the world. These are all programmed, and it's programmed by God. He is the creator. He is the maker. He's the one that programmed matter in the way it exists in our world. And the initial goals of science was to understand his creation, and it's become something much more driven with human pride and selfishness and greed and things like that. But creation is God's, and he's the author of it. So we have to acknowledge that first and foremost before even getting into this topic, because without that, it's just another scary thing that's out there. But if you have that concept down, that God is the ultimate programmer of physical reality, then you can look at something like this black goo thing, and the way it's being presented is that it is programmable matter on one level, but also sentient or alive on another level. And again, as I mentioned just a couple seconds ago, the question remains, and I don't know, there's evidence for both, that it has always existed, and it solves the extraterrestrial question in terms of, are they physical, are they not? And then shamanism, shape-shifting, black-eyed children, even the Black Awakening, where Russ Dizdar talks about this time of chaos and violence and people's eyes turning black and faces contorting, things that seem not real to us. But when you again consider this substance as perhaps part of the vehicle that carries something like a Black Awakening, it becomes, well, heavy. And I hate to use that reference from Back to the Future, but they were always one of the early ones in predictive programming, right? So when he talks about the future being heavy and Doc wondering if there's some sort of problem with the weight or gravitational fields in the future, something like the creation of black goo can really mess with creation, because if it becomes large enough with capacities to self-replicate, then it can pretty much achieve what is called ecophagy or ecophagy. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce it, but the term was coined by Robert Freitas, and it just simply means the literal consumption of an ecosystem. So effectively, the Earth being an ecosystem, if this substance completely consumes, it can destroy an entire ecosystem. And the scenario itself that is thought up by Robert Freitas is that this molecular nanotechnology will go awry, and what will happen is something that's called the gray goo scenario, an out-of-control self-replicating nanorobot consumption of the entire ecosystem, resulting in global ecophagy or ecophagy. And it really got me thinking, like, this has to be on the minds of the elite. This has to be something that was sought after by the occult and the mysteries, and it certainly has. And I think the whole topic of alchemy altogether, trying to find a substance to help them live longer and things like that, that's been there this entire time. So it's no surprise that it's still here today, but it's one of those topics where I almost felt like, personally, I knew it was there the whole time, but for some reason, it's just recently that I've really started to look around and think it's everywhere. I mean, not just subtly, in your face, everywhere. And again, some of it might be just me noticing it now, like, you notice a car, if you buy a car and it's a new car, all of a sudden you notice that car on the road, that whole phenomenon. It could be something like that. But in any case, I do think there is prophetic implication. And I wanted to leave a link in the description section of a book called Hacking Matter: Levitating Chairs, Quantum Mirages, and the Infinite Weirdness of Programmable Atoms, written by Will McCarthy. I believe it was published in 2004, and I don't know exactly when it was written, perhaps even before that, but it looks at the science, it looks at what the scientists are saying. And as a science fiction author, Will McCarthy's use of this concept of programmable matter is identified through the manipulation of quantum dots, and he calls this whole thing the Wellstone. Now, Will McCarthy had published an article on discovermagazine.com in 2008, and here's what he had to say about this whole thing. Quote, "After the Collapsium hit the shelves, I started getting letters from skeptics, and I found myself writing complex articles to defend the concept. I visited labs and spoke with scientists all over the world about the actual state of the art. Columbia, Harvard, Stanford, and more have teams working on quantum dots. There are thousands of researchers working on materials that exploit quantum effects to yield surprising properties, such as bending light around an object to make it invisible. My research culminated in a nonfiction book titled Hacking Matter. Because I'm an engineer, it also led to 2 patents in a startup company, the Programmable Matter Corporation." Now, Will McCarthy has this company called Raven Brick LLC, and he makes thermoreflective windows. So while we're not at this artificially intelligent black goo stage yet, you can see how this sort of technology operates at a very basic level. And as anything in the computing world, as it becomes more complex and able to compute at higher levels, it gets closer to what appears to be sentience or having some sort of spirit or soul. it's providing really that body or host for entities, I believe, that are not welcome here. That's why there is this call from Jesus saying, unless he puts an end to this, no flesh will survive. Something very serious is going to happen. And I get the feeling that this whole topic of programmable matter, black goo, whatever you want to call it, this whole thing has a major role to play in that. And I think it even connects to the topic of chemtrails and why they're putting different metals and particulates in the air for us to consume these large city or largely populated areas. I think it's because they're trying to get us ready for something, some sort of injection. It even ties into the vaccine conversation, and then it ties into the political stuff. I mean, it all kind of connects back around, and the sciences at the smallest scales seems to reveal something about creation, the control of creation, and again, as I mentioned earlier, because creation is actually programmed and ordered by God, for us to start changing at the fundamental level these properties of physical reality, I simply think that there will be a point where it goes too far and mankind just won't be able to handle it. And similar to nuclear weapons or whatever, these things have been ramping up in the last decades and centuries. But it seems like with computers, technology, the internet, it just completely changed human society. And that change is leading to an ultimate end that's not pretty. And I think it has something to do with biblical prophecy. And so while we continue to surround ourselves with technology, I think there is a point where we have to say no. There's going to be a line to be drawn. And we know that in the next few years, I'm certain that wearable technologies will become more and more common, and interacting in virtual worlds, holographic worlds with different ways to communicate in front of you. It all seems to be bending reality. And reality doesn't become rooted in the material world anymore, as it once was. And that opens up to the supernatural and spiritual elements. And again, those elements, the spiritual and supernatural side of things, have always been here. It's not that all of a sudden it appears. It's been here the whole time. But for man to create a vehicle by which evil entities can manifest quite literally in real time, it boggles my mind. I mean, I just can't imagine seeing just like a weird creature thing just pop out and whatever. I'm just not accustomed to seeing that. I understand that, we're being conditioned to see it through CGI and through movies and things like that, but it's hard for me to really think that we're ever going to see something like that. And I'm not saying that it certainly will happen. I'm saying things look like it's headed in that direction, and everything that's written in the Bible in terms of some of the crazy supernatural entities that we'll see in the end times, it might have something to do with this programmable matter, black goo substance that is going to cause a chain reaction in manipulating genetics, DNA. The basic building blocks of life are going to be shifted around and attempted to be harnessed by man. I mean, it just sounds like something disastrous can happen, and perhaps this is why we need an intervention. And perhaps this is also why in Romans 8, creation is moaning for the revealing of the sons of God. If you think about that, in terms of this black goo stuff, it's like, yeah, something happened where this technology, science, this stuff that comes out of it, which is unnatural really to the order of creation in terms of living off the land and things like that. There is no artificiality in that, but through our capabilities and knowledge, we have created an artificial world, really, with the virtual reality. And in this virtual reality, as we go into it further and further, interacting in that virtual realm, the same spillover is going to happen the opposite direction, where entities that are always looking for a host, by the way, these disembodied spirits of the Nephilim, the demons, the ones that Jesus cast into pigs, right? They always want to possess something, preferably a body, a man, a woman, a child. These are things that can happen if gateways are opened. But now, with something like programmable matter, sentient matter, if it becomes self-aware, there's no reason why demonic entities wouldn't possess it, basically. Because, number one, the substance itself, because it is made by the hands of man, would mean that it is not part of the natural order. We manipulated something within the natural order of things to create this substance. And as an analogy, and I think a good one, this stuff that we're seeing with all the black goo is literally sin manifesting physically. And so that really puts me into this mode of looking at the man of sin, the man of lawlessness. is there a whole nother layer to this topic of the individual man Antichrist and standing in the holy place? Nicholson 1968 believes that that's talking about the temple of the Holy Spirit, the human body. And I think there's something there. I'm not saying that's exactly how it's going to be fulfilled. There's other passages that would suggest that it is an actual geological spot with the temple that he is going to stand in, and that could also be the case. But it just begins to shade a lot of passages differently, a lot of passages in the book of Daniel and obviously Revelation. And I've talked about the global brain in the past and how we're all feeding into it. And really, we are creating a clone of the human race in the virtual reality. I mean, we're feeding this thing information about who we are, what we do, how we behave, what we believe. And there is a virtual version of the human race that is becoming in the virtual realm, in the cloud, so to speak.
The 14th of September 2011. Lifelike cells are made of metal. Could living things that evolved from metals be glunking about somewhere in the universe? Perhaps. In a lab in Glasgow, UK, one man is intent on proving that metal-based life is possible. He has managed to build cell-like bubbles from giant metal-containing molecules and has given them some lifelike properties. He now hopes to induce them to evolve into fully inorganic self-replicating entities. I am 100% positive that we can get evolution to work outside organic biology, says Lee Cronin at the University of Glasgow. His building blocks are large polyoxymetalates made of a range of metal atoms, most recently tungsten, linked to oxygen and phosphorus. By simply mixing them in solution, he can get them to self-assemble into cell-like spheres. Other synthetic biologists are reserving judgment for now. Cronin's bubbles are never going to be truly lifelike until they carry something like DNA to drive self-replication and evolution, says Manuel Porcar of the University of Valencia in Spain. That is theoretically possible, he says, but I cannot imagine what kind of system they would implement. Cronin isn't sure yet either, but last year he showed that he could get polyoxymetalates to use each other as templates to self-replicate. In the long run, the real test will be whether the cells can modify their own chemistry to adapt to different environments. Cronin hints that his latest work may show this, but is unwilling to give details as yet. I think we have just shown the first droplets that can evolve, is all he will say. If Cronin is right, then the possible range of extraterrestrial life is blown wide open. There is every possibility that there are life forms out there which aren't based on carbon, he says. Tadashi Sugawara of the University of Tokyo, Japan, doesn't see why not. On Mercury, the materials are all different. There might be a creature made of inorganic elements. Cronin may be some way from proving this, says Sugawara, but he has pointed out a new direction.
So keep that in mind as part of this process, that these things have that spiritual component that's also growing with the physical. Now in Psalm 83, if you read through here, it pretty much talks about the enemy conspiring against God and his people. And in verse 5 in the ESV, it says, "For they conspire with one accord. Against you they make a covenant." And it goes into some passages that talk about different beings, different tribes. Some of them, I think, were giant tribes like Ammon, Amalek, Philistia, with the inhabitants of Tyre. Esser also has joined them. They are the strong arm of the children of Lot. And if you look up the children of Lot, or the descendants of Lot, you find that they're mentioned in Deuteronomy 2, verse 19, where it says, "And when you approach the territory of the people of Ammon, do not harass them or contend with them, for I will not give you any of the land of the people of Ammon as a possession, because I had given it to the sons of Lot for a possession." Now, interestingly, the next verse there, verse 20, says, "It is also counted as a land of Rephaim." Rephaim formerly lived there. but the Ammonites call them Zamzummim. Verse 21, a people great and many, and tall as the Anakim, but the Lord destroyed them before the Ammonites, and they disposed them and settled in their place. Now, interestingly, verse 20 talks about how the Rephaim had formerly lived there. And of course, if you study the Rephaim, direct connection to the Nephilim, the spirits of the dead, I really think this whole Nephilim concept, or at least what comes out of this unholy union that happened back in Genesis 6, it's not just a genetic thing. There could be something else going on. And you know the passage in Jude 1:6, there's another one that's similar in 2 Peter 2:4, a well-known passage where it says, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting change under darkness unto the judgment of the great day. Now this means that at or near the judgment of the great day, these angels will be released again. And this time they're coming from everlasting chains under darkness. And again, they may be released into what is not their first estate, not their own habitation. Now, the other end of this is our habitation. Our estate is this physical reality. Of course, there's a spiritual part of us, a soul. These things exist, of course, but our direct experience is through the physical medium here. So while we're in this dimension, something happened where these angelic beings came through and manipulated God's fashioned orderly creation. And so we look at Genesis 6 and it sort of adds to it in some sense that if this is what happened, by being able to take on any form all the way down to the quantum levels, and if you can manage to shapeshift or appear fully in the form of man all the way down to the quantum level, then genetics is a much larger scale level than the quantum levels. So if you are controlling the quantum levels, you can control the genetic levels. And that's why I think we have the story of the Nephilim, the giants, the mythological creatures, all that stuff. So it takes everything one step inward, if you will, and a whole new set of understanding can be had through it. Now, even in evolution, right, you have the primordial soup where life began, and why is that even a concept that's being pushed, especially in the materialistic realm? Well, because I think they were never able to escape some facts or realities about the situation. And that thought form that we evolved, that there is no God ultimately, which is what their argument boils down to, that comes from an unwelcomed source in this domain. It's a spiritual darkness. It is an evil darkness. It is sin manifesting. And I think it has something to do with darkness over the face of the deep and even dark matter, and all this stuff that's in science, in the material realm, but they can't explain it. So they sort of try to push it off and give it these fancy names and stuff. But really what they're doing is mythologizing what they don't understand, which is the most ironic thing, because the hard materialists are the ones that would criticize those of us who believe there's a spiritual realm, that there is a soul, that there is way more to reality than just the physical medium. But through these information sciences and nanotechnology and all of this, it's changing that perspective, I think. I think people will start coming around to like, okay, there's something way more going on, because if we can create an information bubble that we can control and ultimately extend that into controlling matter, and then eventually, probably losing control when this thing becomes self-aware, quote unquote self-aware, then there's something else going on. We created something different. We, as humans, built something that became what appears to be life, intelligent life at that. And again, this ties all the way back with Revelation 13, the image of the beast, the mark of the beast. It all comes together, and this piece just really for me has hit home in the last few days or few weeks, I guess, looking at this, that with the warnings of science, of what's happening in laboratories, especially the ones that are unofficial, that are uncontrolled by any kind of government or institution, not that they are the pillar of good ethics in terms of what they're doing in the labs, but if the capacity to do things at a profound level are there, rest assured, they're doing it. Someone's doing it. Somebody is doing it in some laboratory, and I'm sure there have been some interesting results already. And the elite know that. The elite probably have tabs on some of these issues or some of these topics. And so when we see it in movies, and that's the other thing, I've seen Big Hero 6, I've seen all these movies, But then I'm looking at these lists that people are sharing, and it's like, oh my goodness, I've watched so many of these movies and I didn't even really think about the goo aspect. And for example, Big Hero 6, I do recall, because I did see the movie in theaters when it came out, I do recall thinking, wow, this has some sort of new profound level of understanding here of what matter can do, programmable matter, if you want to call it that, controllable matter. Just the possibilities are pretty staggering here. But I didn't make that direct connection to black goo in that moment. And now, again, as I look, it's pretty much all over the place. It's ridiculous. And, just any kind of topic you get into in the world of conspiracy, it just ties in along quite nicely too. You got smart meters and the technocratic system that's being built, all the way to the esoteric side of things and the spiritual implications of communication with entities and, all the occult stuff that's done by secret societies and rituals and everything else. That stuff all ties in as well. And I just think it's something that we should keep a closer eye on. And again, still, even though we may understand it, when we see this thing happen, it's almost going to be ridiculous in terms of swallowing up people, and changing them profoundly. Something about worshiping the beast, the dragon, and taking the mark of the beast, and these concepts that cause those end times humans to not really be human, not being redeemable. This is a very serious issue. At a certain point, the sharing of the gospel ends because there will be humans that are unredeemable. And it's no wonder that Jesus needs to return, because otherwise all flesh will be destroyed. I'm doing more research on this, and I'm doing some writing on this as well. I've had some writing opportunities come up, and I'll share that with everyone once it's a little more solidified. But I'll leave you with this video here that was made by FW Thinking, which is a basic technology, humanity, the future. It's a basic science website, but they do tackle some of these things and make it interesting. So I'll leave you with part of this video here to get you thinking. Go back into the Word of God and really start digging into some of these scriptures with a whole new light. And I won't get into it now, but I do think that as the Black Awakening happens, there will also be an opposite awakening that happens in the church. And, every time there has been an awakening, it seems like it comes from a direct response to grabbing a hold and understanding as a church body, as a whole community, what darkness is doing. And that's when the church lights up, because they realize all at the same time that something dark is going on, something very dark. So this time around, it's going to be even more powerful. And that's the other side. That's the positive side, again, of being a Christian and seeing this and understanding this, is the encouragement that I think there can be this great awakening. You guys are already part of that movement, I think. If you're watching this video and you're tracking with me all the way to this point here, and tracking with other people like Nicholson 1968 and many others that have talked about this, you're one of the few that really grasps where things are going. Not that we are prophets or anything, but we're able to kind of see where things are headed. We see the freight train coming our way, so to speak. But it's also our job to remind everyone that, hey, there is hope in this. There is a resolution. There is truth that sets us free. And it's through the shed blood of Jesus Christ and his resurrection. And if you really think about it, death is this thing that we can't control. Death is this thing that can be avoided longer, or, as some of these scientists believe, eradicated completely. And things like black goo or this programmable matter can have a huge impact on that pursuit. But then you think about who Jesus was, how he just pretty much defeated death 2,000 years ago in the way he did it, and for the reasons why he did it. He made a change at the quantum level, somehow resurrecting from the dead in this physical reality. And he's alive today, and it's just a crazy thought, but that's God using his programmed creation and displaying absolute sovereignty over it. And we can't forget that. God is ultimately in control, but he allows this sort of darkness to appear, especially in fallen man, because ultimately there needs to be judgment for it, but also because part of being free will creatures, we have to have the ability to choose if we are going to participate in this free gift of salvation through the shed blood of Jesus Christ or not. And God honors people who reject it. So to me, it's like, I wish more people who are atheists and stuff would at least feel where I'm coming from, which is that when you deny Jesus Christ, and how he defeated death and how he rose from the dead, you're sort of denying your own humanity. You know, you are made in the image of God, and you don't even acknowledge that really because you don't believe in God. But then the alternative is to effectively go this direction of self-manipulation and change. And that's why I think tattoo culture, piercings, plastic surgery, all these things have happened, right? Ultimately to transhumanism, to a post-human, and like Dmitry Itskov wants, he wants to live forever as a holographic body and a, just software brain. And that is their vision of immortality. And it's just within this construct of God's creation. And he provided such a simpler answer than all this technological advancement. But anyway, I'm rambling at this point. I was going to show you a video to end this video, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.
Now, back in our self-reconfiguring modular robots episode, we talked about robots that can reshape and reform themselves so that they can do any particular task perfectly. Well, what if we take that same idea, but think small? I mean, really small. I'm talking about programmable matter, actual three-dimensional tactile material that can take on any predetermined shape and then change shapes on demand. Imagine that we have a programmable material workstation. That might include a little trough with some beige putty in it. And this putty looks totally normal until you send it some information, like a virtual model of a three-dimensional object. And then it springs into action, forming that object right in front of your eyes. Now, it sounds like it's the stuff of science fiction, and that crazy kind of technology has to be 100 years away, right? Maybe, but maybe not. One approach to programmable matter is Claytronics, which is an idea that came out of Carnegie Mellon University and Intel. The base unit of Claytronics is the cadam, the computerized atom. Now, these cadams can work together to form three-dimensional objects on demand. And building that kind of machine is pretty tricky. They have to be able to receive energy. They have to be able to communicate with one another. And they have to be able to move around, preferably without having any moving parts of their own. So several years ago, Carnegie Mellon researchers built cadam cylindrical prototypes that were 34 millimeters in diameter. Now, these things were able to move around on a two-dimensional plane, pushing and pulling against each other using electromagnets. In the future, we want to see even smaller cadams, maybe just a millimeter in size, or the size of a grain of sand, or maybe even smaller than that. Now, in a future where this is a reality, where we have programmable material, why should we be excited about it? Well, think about it. Email has pretty much rendered the fax obsolete. But what if you could fax three-dimensional objects? Let's say that I have a trough full of Claytronic cadams in front of me, and I take an object and dip it into that trough. The cadams flow over it, creating a virtual model of the object I put into it. And then I send that to you, and you have your own trough of Claytronic cadams that assemble themselves into that same three-dimensional object. Boom! I just sent you a copy of a real physical thing. Or in the far future, it could be part of telepresence. Forget phone calls, forget video calls. I would be able to create a full three-dimensional Claytronic version of myself that could appear in front of you and give you a handshake or even a hug. The entertainment applications for this alone are astounding. Imagine playing a video game and the characters literally leap off the screen and become three-dimensional creatures in your home. And if this stuff becomes plentiful and cheap enough, we could have objects disassembling and reassembling themselves everywhere. Let's say I've got a bunch of friends coming over for dinner and I want to make sure I got enough seats for them. Well, I could use Claytronics to build the furniture right then and there. Then, when my guests leave, I can have it disassemble back into those individual cadams and go into a vat for storage. One thing we have to take into consideration is this amazing future may never appear during our lifetimes. But I'm still really excited by the prospect of people working on this technology. And we don't even know where it could go. I mean, when people first started making computers, they had no way of knowing that the future would turn out to be as amazing as our present is.